Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Hooper on Blu-ray. Hooper was a film that came out in 1978 and was directed by Hal Needham, and it starred Burt Reynolds. And this movie is a rather fun one because it works as both a comedy and a drama, and there's a really strong meta quality to it in the sense that we have a director and a star who both began work as stuntmen earlier on in their careers. And the two of them would at one point become really good friends in real life and would collaborate on multiple films together. And so when the two of them worked together on this movie, they wanted to do a tribute to stuntmen in general. And so what you have here is a certain sense of authenticity, both in the comedic portions of the film as well as the dramatic portions of the film. And in the comedic sense, I mean, you have this, carnival, gonzo, freewheeling world that stunt people seem to inhabit. And what we see, as over the top as it may look, doesn't feel like it's not authentic, because when you consider the fact that stunt people, I mean, yes, they have, guilds and contracts and rules and regulations and what have you that they operate under. The fact that they're putting their lives on the line anytime they do a stunt for a movie, at least according to this movie, it kind of gives them a sense of, recklessness that makes sense, because they're like, okay, well, if I'm going to get killed tomorrow, if I'm going to probably have my bones broken by doing this such and such a crazy stunt tomorrow, well, I may as well live it up today. And so, going for a beer run might entail, multiple, cars, driving at 90 miles an hour, and some of them going backwards while tossing cans of beer, at each other, in between the open windows when they're right next to each other, mind you, while they're still driving at 90 miles an hour, so stuff like that is a typical Tuesday for them. And of course, but then the next day they got to show up and you're like, okay, fingers crossed, that our bones don't break or we don't get wiped out, that kind of thing. So I confess that I don't know a whole lot about the stunt industry, but what I do know, like from, interviews I've listened to or, articles I've read, and of course, from this movie, I mean, we do see just this, fascinating world that's both intoxicatingly fun, if you're a part of that scene, but also undeniably dangerous. And so that's where the more dramatic portions of the film really come into play, because we see that, for the veteran stuntmen of the industry, time has taken a toll on their bodies in a way that, is unique. Because, for, someone who is not, a stuntman, I mean, yeah, time's going to have its way with you. Regardless. But if you're a stuntman, though, odds are, you're going to rack up, a series of injuries that over time are going to lead to something debilitating. For example, if you're a stuntman who's been around for, 30 years in the industry, doing stunts, for all those 30 years, you're probably going to, have several, structural injuries, like you're going to have bone injuries and things like that over time just build up to a point where you might take a tumble on the street, and some people might be able to just walk that off, no big deal. It might be like, oh, but if you're a stunt person who's got several damaged bones in their body, that they've accumulated over the years, they slip on the sidewalk, boom, there's something potentially debilitating there. So the risk for a debilitating injury for a stuntman that has constantly, put his or her body through hell, the risk is definitely higher for someone in that industry versus, say, Joe Blow, who's just walking down the street and they slip on a banana peel. Yes, they could potentially, break their bones by falling a certain way. Shoot, I broke my, femur on April 1st of all days, my left femur, in a very stupid accident, and my legs got tangled up in my pants and, fell out from under me, and boom, yeah. So yes, you can walk, be doing something simple and break your bones, but the thing is, the risk is higher for, a stunt person who is constantly putting their bodies at risk like that and constantly taking that kind of damage. So Yeah, so you basically see that, exemplified on film. And, we have, Burt Reynolds, giving a very good performance in this movie as the protagonist, who, I mean, is on one hand very endearing and, very freewheeling, very fun, but at the same time, I mean, is kind of reluctant to admit to the fact that, he's running on borrowed time, in the sense that, I mean, of course, I mean, he's aware of that. I mean, everyone's got to go sometime, but the fact that he's in a profession that constantly jeopardizes his, physical well-being, I mean, his body can only take so much, in consideration of the fact that he's been putting his body through hell for years. And so while he kind of tries to laugh it off, I mean, he's getting to a point where he's at the age that he can't just laugh it off anymore. I mean, he might be able to laugh it off to the public, but in private, he's kind of like, okay, I gotta see a doctor, or I've got to get a painkiller, or something like that. So, so yeah, I mean, so Burt Reynolds, I thought, did a really good job, portraying, this type of character. There's a lot more nuance in this film than you would expect. And also, a couple other things that were neat about the film, in a meta sense, were the fact that you have actress Sally Field playing, Sonny Hooper's girlfriend, Gwen. And in real life, Sally Field and Burt Reynolds were in a relationship at this point in time, and were actually in 4 films together, including this one. And so, there's certainly that meta aspect to the film. I mean, you have a real life couple playing a couple on screen. And you also have actor Jan Michael Vincent in this film, in one of his more noteworthy roles. And we're talking, say, this was at a point in time where, like, in the 70s, Jan Michael Vincent, I think, was probably at his best in terms of acting, because, I mean, he has certain roguish charisma to him. I mean, he was a good-looking actor, but he brought a certain charisma, that captivated audiences at this point in time. I mean, you see him in movies like Buster and Billy, The Big Wednesday, or the Charles Bronson movie, The Mechanic. I mean, you don't forget him. I mean, he's someone who looks charming, and at this point in time was charming, but also had an edge to him. And of course, most people will probably remember him as the protagonist Stringfellow Hawk from the TV show Airwolf. And while he was certainly good in that role up to a certain point, there did come a point in the series where his real life addiction to alcohol, as well as other hard drugs, began to show up on screen. And so while Airwolf was probably his best known work, the work he did in the 70s, including his work in Hooper, was probably his best as an actor. And so, it's interesting because, Burt Reynolds is clearly older than Jan Michael Vincent. And you look at the two on screen. And so you have, this guy who was already kind of a veteran of the industry. I mean, he'd been a stuntman, he'd been an actor, and he kind of knew the ins and outs already. And then, of course, I mean, with Jan Michael Vincent, on the other hand, him being the younger star, you do see that dynamic between the veteran and the relative newcomer. I'm not to say that Jan Michael Vincent was a newcomer at this point in his career, because he'd been in several movies, but the fact that there's that gap, the age gap between them, there is that dynamic. And also the fact that Jan Michael Vincent, his character, who goes by the name of Ski, is an up-and-coming talented stuntman that will serve as a rival for the character of Hooper, has a rather interesting dynamic as well. Because, of course, I mean, you have two characters who are, in their own way, talented in the realm of stuntmen, but of course they have their own techniques, their own takes on things. But with Jan Michael Vincent's character kind of looking up to Hooper, I mean, there is that, respect that sort of, develops between the two of them. So while they are rivals, it's more like a friendly rivalry. Like there's a competitive rivalry as opposed to a hostile rivalry. And anytime, Ski, Jan Michael Vincent's character, does something remarkable, Burt Reynolds' character, Hooper, as the older stuntman, he kind of feels like he has to one up it, and so that's where a lot of the rivalry comes into play, and that also kind of leads into you know a, the character of Hooper, whose body is already in a damaged state, putting himself through even more risk, just to kind of compete with this younger stuntman, who's certainly not without talent. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating film in more than one way, but in a meta sense, very much so. But let's go ahead and get into it. So Hooper, of course, centers on the character of Hooper, as played by Burt Reynolds, who is a veteran stuntman. And all things considered, things for the most part are going rather well in his life. I mean, he's got a loyal group of friends and coworkers that respect him, because he's proven he's got what it takes to be an expert stuntman. I mean, he's become an expert stuntman over time. He's learned from the best and added his own take on things. And then of course he's got his girlfriend Gwen, as played by Sally Field, and the two of them are in a loving relationship with one another. And she's there for him at the end of the day, and he's there for her too, even though he's reluctant to commit to, say, marriage, because amongst other things, I mean, he had a marriage prior to meeting Gwen that did not go so well, and a big part of that was because the toll that being a stuntman takes on your social life, I mean, is something that can't just be laughed off. And so the fact that he's got a good relationship with Gwen is something that's quite remarkable, especially, for those in the stunt industry. And so one day, though, he's introduced to a new up-and-coming stuntman named Ski, as played by Jan Michael Vincent. And Ski, I mean, while he's certainly not without his sense of adventure, he tries to approach things from a more scientific angle. For example, I mean, he'll use his a pocket calculator to calculate certain trajectories of certain stunts and things like that. Whereas Hooper and other veteran stuntmen that are friends with him, I mean, they do things the old-fashioned way, and so basically they don't rely on on fancy things like calculators to get trajectories and things like that. But at this point in time, they are working under a sort of a prima donna film director, whose last film grossed somewhere around $100 million, and so the fact that he made that much money has it to where the studio is constantly catering to his whims. And one of the things that is problematic is the fact that this prima donna director keeps on insisting on more and more increasingly dangerous stunts. And so while both Hooper and Ski, for the most part, I mean, they carry on like troopers and what have you, this is very much a danger to Hooper, because as time has gone on, his body has taken an insane amount of damage. Not just from the standpoint of having scars on your body, but like to a point where one of his friends has to sort of hook him up with some painkillers. I mean, nothing like cocaine or anything like that, but a couple of pills or a couple of injections, and that sort of go on to deaden the pain or make it more easy to live with. And so while Hooper's not like a full-on drug addict or anything like that, he has having to resort to semi-underhanded means to basically get through the day. But then of course, I mean, some of his friends are telling him just to go see the doctor, because he keeps putting it off. And while he laughs it off, Hooper is frankly scared, that the doctor is going to have some bad news for him that he won't be able to just, brush off. And sure enough, when he finally does go to the doctor, this is the same doctor who's, done back surgery on him more than once. But this doctor is pointing out, all these, parts on his, spinal structure, that have taken a lot of damage. And he said it kind of looks like a road map, And so, while Hooper, in his own characteristic manner, sort of laughs it off and, gets a, chuckle out of the doctor sort of, leaves him with this, parting, shot. He's basically saying, if you were a horse, I would shoot you. And not to say he doesn't like Hooper, but he's just saying that the amount of, as badly damaged as your body is, I mean, you're not going to last much longer in this profession you've chosen. Not to say that he doesn't want him to succeed, but he's just saying, hey, I've seen some stuff, and it's not going to end well for you if you keep it up. And so with that in mind, of course, I mean, Hooper, amongst other things, is also, reluctant to, get married to his girlfriend, Gwen. And even though her father, a fellow veteran stuntman by the name of Jocko, as played by Brian Keith, is, sort of good-naturedly, needling, Hooper to, get married to his daughter, because obviously the two love each other. I mean, Hooper, in a very candid moment, just confesses to him that, he tried getting married once and it was a disaster, and mainly because of the fact that being a stuntman kind of takes a toll on your social life. And so, yeah, the fact that, he's got this, good relationship with, Jocko's daughter, Gwen, is something remarkable because she stuck with him for this long. So he's afraid that if he gets married to her, that'll ruin it, not just for him, but for her, for both of them. So he does care about her and he loves her, but he doesn't want to, take the risk of, basically damaging their relationship by, getting married and putting even more of a pressure on, both of them. And so, he's got all this stuff going on, but on the other hand, though, he's still, living it up, outside of, work. He and his friends, they, go for beer runs that are oftentimes, these crazed excursions on the highway where a couple of them, drive in reverse at 90 miles an hour while tossing beer cans at each other. And they're like, hey, gee, thanks, while at going 90 miles an hour. And they'll even, get into, bar fights, some of which they start. So yeah, of course, Hooper's living it up. And, once Ski, comes onto the scene, they do have a rivalry with each other, but the two of them actually do kind of become friends. And, to a point where, they actually collaborate with one another on, multiple stunts. And, with this prima donna director, constantly asking more and more of them, he's at the point where he's borderline sidelining Hooper in favor of Ski, because, the fact that, Hooper, while he's not afraid of risk, he's at a point where, because of, the fact that, he can't deny the amount of damage his body has been taking, is reluctant to, take his stunt work up to 11, so to speak. Whereas Ski, it's no problem. Ski's a young man, to be fair. And so, and then there comes a point where, with all this going on, this prima donna director is, wanting to make a philosophical, cinematic statement in this movie that he's directing. And basically, he wants to have this whole town be destroyed, and have the two main characters, basically jump a bridge after it's been blown up. So they'll be, driving, like maniacs, in a sports car through this town that's blowing up all around them. And when they get to this bridge, the bridge is going to explode, and the two of them are going to, the two characters are going to rappel to the other side, out of the car and down the cliff, and then get to the other side to safety, all in one take. But they're like, okay, how are we going to do all this in one take? And so, Ski is the one, who, actually, no, it's both Ski and Hooper who come up with the idea of making a jump with a rocket car, as in getting a sports car, it's already insanely fast, and literally putting a rocket on it so it can jump the gap where the bridge was. And, with Ski, using some of his calculations and everything, he convinces Hooper that it can be done. And once Hooper, sort of goes over things, he in turn convinces the director that, yeah, it's possible it can be done, but this is probably going to be the most dangerous thing we've ever done. This is going to be the most dangerous gag we've tried. So he's going to need $100,000 and split two ways. $50,000 for him, $50,000 for Ski. And of course, the director tries to have one of his people, talk Hooper down, but then Hooper, basically makes it clear that no, as dangerous as this stunt is, if you want us to do it, that's the price. That's a price of admission. So, of course, this is, pressure enough in its own way, because, the fact that they're going to be in a rocket car, jumping, this gap, where this bridge once was, there's no guarantee that the car is going to, survive structurally intact on the other side, let alone, land upright, because for the stuntman to survive, the car has to be constructed in such a way to where there's like a, safety, cage around them almost, or the car on the inside needs to be designed in such a way to where it functions as a safety cage almost. But in order for both actors to have the best shot of surviving, the car, if it makes the jump, has to land, right side up, and stay on, all four wheels, once it hits the ground. Because if it tumbles, if it goes upside down at that speed, more than likely it'll kill them. Or even if it just goes on its side, it'll kill at least one of them. So one of them is going to be driving, and the other is going to be keeping track of the pressure that they are going to need for the rocket to make the jump. So no pressure, really. So with that in mind, then Jocko, Gwen's father, has an accident that in some ways has been brought on by his years as a stuntman himself. And basically what happens with him is he claims he just fell in the shower and broke his knee, but what ended up happening was he actually had a stroke, and then he slipped in the shower and broke his knee, and which actually ended up being worse for him because of the fact that his body was already, damaged because of his, years as a stuntman. And so, when, Hooper, goes to meet Gwen and Jocko in the hospital, of course, he sees the state of his friend and, mentor, and he kind of has a glimpse of things to come. And then, so, he's, talking to Gwen, and, and he promises her that, after, we do this movie, I'm out of the game. We're not going to, I'm not going to do any more stunts. And he's like, with the money I'm making here, I can pay off the ranch. And so, and of course, Gwen, she's fearful for, Hooper's life, considering what's just happened to her father. But at the same time, when she hears that, he's, serious about this being his final, film, she's like, okay, I'm with you on this. But then she finds out from a friend of theirs exactly what the stunt's going to be. She flips out, because she's like, she was thinking it was just going to be, your regular motorcycle or regular car stunt or something like that. But when she finds out just how dangerous it is, she tells Hooper that, if he does this, she's not going to be there for him this time, because, she's convinced that this is going to be the death of him. And so, with all that going on, Hooper, he kind of has to, weigh his options. Does he, do the stunt that he agreed to, or does he, and also, give, Ski the best chance of surviving this stunt, considering that, he's one of only 3 people that's qualified to make this stunt, or does he, basically, do the quote-unquote smart thing and walk away from this, which would forever ruin his career, in the town of Hollywood, or just in the film industry in general. But it would also, hurt a lot of other people's job prospects, considering, the stunt industry that he works in, and the fact that, because, he signed something and he planned to do something, everyone else is planning to work around that. So if he bails, that's going to leave a lot of other people in the lurch. And so, even, one of the other people in the film industry, a guy named, Max, is, kind of like, he's a producer, right? But as much as he likes, for films the films that he's producing to make money, he doesn't want his, films to, cost someone their life. And so, he tries to plead with the director to, leave the stunt out of the film. Wrap the film up in another way. And he's saying it's just a movie. And so the director's like, just a movie? Well, tell that to the shareholders. In fact, I'm going to get on the phone with them right now, and we'll see which one of us has the greater pull. Like I said, prima donna director, right? And he cares more about a statement than, the well-being of, those who are working on the movie. And so, and he even insists that in order to stay on budget, to avoid going over budget, which this stunt is threatening to do for the film, he insists on certain crucial scenes being written out, so that way there's more of a focus, on the stunt, and the movie will stay on budget. So he doesn't care about anyone's well-being. He just cares about making his grand, cinematic, statement. So with all that going on, Hooper, biggest stunt of his career, and all the pressure in the world on him. And Ski, in the meantime, is starting to get an idea of, just how dangerous, this profession really can be. So, yeah, this was a really, fun movie, and I really enjoyed how, as I mentioned at the beginning here, that it works when it's doing comedy, and it also works when it's doing drama. And admittedly, there is more of a focus on comedy than drama, but it works in both areas. And so Burt Reynolds, does a wonderful job as the main character of Sonny Hooper, and he's always been one of those actors who can be both funny and serious, and oftentimes in the same movie. And of course, you look at him in movies like, The Longest Yard or Sharky's Machine. He's hilarious when, he's doing something funny, but he's also, got a lot of depth to him, or more depth to him than you'd expect when he's doing something serious. And once more, oftentimes in the same movie. And so some of his movies, from what I remember, they focused more so on comedy than anything else. But when you have these movies that show his range in both areas, that's where I feel like Burt Reynolds really shines. And so, yeah, Hooper, is definitely, another, good role for him and another good movie for him. And, the fact that he's bringing some of his, own real life experience to this movie. I mean, granted, in some of the scenes, it's definitely someone else doing the stunt because, well, he's the lead actor in a movie, and well, you've got to have, someone, take the fall for him, things like that. But the fact that he brings some of his knowledge, to this movie, and it kind of shows up on screen is pretty cool to see. And also, I mean, there's such a colorful cast of characters on hand here. I mean, you have veteran actor John Marley playing the movie producer Max Burns, and I've seen that guy in a lot of things. If I remember correctly, I want to say he was in one of the Larry Cohen movies. One of the It's Alive movies. I think it may have been the second one, but yeah, I mean, the guy, I mean, he's been in a lot of movies. I mean, he's been in both B movies and, mainstream movies. So it's pretty cool to see him there as, this producer who, for once, is actually someone who gives a damn about the people working under him. And of course, I mean, Brian Keith as, the sort of father figure, slash mentor, stuntman, Jocko, was neat to see because he and Burt Reynolds were really good friends behind the scenes as well, and so there's that friendly dynamic between the two of them that's very much authentic. And so seeing him in the moments where like he's hospitalized kind of hit home for me because I mean I had a family member who unfortunately they were getting up there in age, and they'd already had some issues with strokes, but then they ended up breaking their ankle, which in turn, led to them having to go to the hospital and have surgery. And well, because of the age they were at, and because they were already going through some health problems, that led to a stroke, which kind of led to their death. And so, that kind of seeing the character of Jocko, in that kind of situation, or in a situation that was involving a stroke and bodily damage on an already elderly person. I mean, that was something that kind of it was like a splash of cold water to the face. It's like, okay, yeah, the movie's fun and games, but here's the harsh reality of what could happen to you if you have this kind of profession and you keep on going and going, when you should have stopped at a certain point. And so of course, when it comes to the more dramatic moments, I thought that Burt Reynolds did a good job of showing his character's reluctance to face reality, and if he does acknowledge reality, I mean he tends to kind of get blitzed with his friends before maybe reluctantly admitting it's like, okay, I gotta stop, that kind of thing. But you also have Adam West, of all people, showing up in the movie. And it's kind of a cameo, although he's, in the movie for more than one scene. But he's basically playing himself, playing sort of this James Bond XP. And so it's like the movie is a parody of the movie industry, and the movie that they're working on is a parody of the James Bond movies. And so you have Adam West, basically doing a parody of, James Bond, right? And Burt Reynolds' character Hooper is the stuntman for him. Excuse me. But of course, like most people, when it comes to Adam West, I'm more familiar with him basically being Batman from Batman and Robin, the '60s series, all goofy and cheesy and what have you. But here, though, it was cool to see him basically just playing kind of himself, but in a realistic way. I mean, like he's jovial and everything, but at the same time, he plays someone who, yeah, he's the lead actor in a movie, but when it comes to the focus of this actual movie here, the focus of the film is on the world of the stuntman. And so when Adam West's character tries to fit in, they sort of say, like, hey, yes, we're gonna make you look good, but you stay over there, you do your thing, we'll stay over here and do our thing, that kind of thing. And there even comes a point where Hooper says to him, hey, because this is after a point where he's done this really cool motorcycle stunt for Adam West's character, and because Adam West's character, is doing a James Bond thing. He's on a motorcycle, goes under a truck, and it looks really cool. And of course, it's Hooper doing that. And Adam West comes up. He's like, "Man, that was great." And he's like, "You please show me how to do it. How do you do that? I want to know how to do it. I want to, go under trucks." And Hooper just tells him, he's like, "Hey, I'll make a deal with you. I won't do any acting if you won't do any stunts. Okay?" So it was interesting. I mean, I do wish that Adam West's character had been in there a little more, because to get a glimpse of that kind of rivalry between, say, the film crew and the stunt crew was interesting to see. And it would have been interesting, like, say, to see more of, how his character, handled that kind of rejection, or at the very least, handled that whole aspect of the fact that, yeah, we're working together, but we're not exactly friends because we're in totally different worlds here. So it's interesting how the rivalry with, the film people and the stunt people, kind of resulted in them butting heads, whereas the rivalry between, fellow stuntmen, like, say, Hooper and Ski, was portrayed as something more friendly, something to where it's like, I mean, yeah, we're pushing each other's buttons, but we're trying to get the best out of each other, and then they actually become friends, and of course, okay, so you had, Sally Field. I mean, she's, good just about anything she is, and this is in the 70s, so Sally Field looked fantastic. She was very gorgeous, very beautiful to look at, but her dynamic with Burt Reynolds, rang very true. It's like they were going out behind the scenes in real life, and that kind of chemistry does show up in the movie. And so while the movie's not a full-on love fest or nothing like that, when you have these romantic beats between her and Burt Reynolds, they really feel genuine. And so as a result, I mean, her character comes across as very believable, supportive girlfriend, for Hooper. And and it was cool to see that kind of chemistry between the characters that kind of stemmed from knowing each other and being with each other in real life. And then of course Jan Michael Vincent, seeing him at a point in his career where he had, it was clear that he had a certain amount of range to him. It was neat to see, because I mean, as I mentioned, in his time on Airwolf, I mean he was good up to a point, but then the fact that he had a drug and alcohol problem became very obvious at a certain point in that show. So it's kind of like he was good up to a point, and then you're kind of like, dude, you need to get help, if it's showing up on screen, that kind of thing. So I don't remember exactly when his drinking and drug problem began, but when you see him in this movie, I mean, it doesn't show up on screen if he was already having that problem. I'd like to think that this was before he had that. I think I mentioned that earlier, but for the most, but all that aside, I mean, Jan Michael Vincent, was really good in the part of Ski, and I mean, his chemistry with Burt Reynolds was believable as well. Because they go from being friendly rivals to genuine friends. To a point where it's like, not only do they have each other's back in a barroom brawl, but they have each other's back, when it comes to doing, what is, for all intents and purposes, the world's most dangerous stunt. And to see him get to that point was pretty cool. And Jan Michael Vincent and Burt Reynolds, I mean, they play very well off of each other. Although there is a bit of grim foreshadowing, I mean, if the background of things, but I mean, there's, on one hand, it's a really touching scene because, Burt, Hooper and Ski are, kind of bonding with each other over, some of their shared life difficulties when it comes to, say, their romantic relationships. And, it turns out, that they've both been married at one point or another, and it didn't work out, or it might not be working out, because of the amount of time they spend away from, or they spent away from their spouses, because of what they're doing with the as stuntmen. And and you really see, these points of commonality, bringing them together and, solidifying their bond of friendship. And it's a nice scene and everything. But on the downside, though, basically they're, slamming back, these tall ones, beer cans, right? And I mean, on one hand, it's kind of like, two, friends, bonding over beer and things like that, or telling some, funny stories here and there over beer. But on the other hand, though, the fact that Jan Michael Vincent would really develop an alcohol problem, it kind of puts that particular scene in darker contrast with what we're the jovial endearing scene that we're seeing on screen is kind of contrasting with the reality of what would end up happening with Jan Michael Vincent. So I mean, like I said, if you're not all too familiar with the behind the scenes stuff with certain actors, I mean, it's probably not that big of a deal. But at the same time, if you are, it's kind of like, ooh, that's kind of grim, and a grim foreshadowing of things to come. But yeah, I mean, that aside, I mean, I thought that Jan Michael Vincent was pretty good in this movie. And of course, I mean, Burt Reynolds, I mean, as a star of the film, had good chemistry with everyone he was with, and it was really fascinating to be watching a movie about people making a movie. And so while the focus is all for the most part on the stunt side of things, we do catch glimpses of other aspects of filmmaking. And I do wish that the glimpses that we saw of other aspects of filmmaking got just a little bit more focus. I mean, case in point, the aforementioned plot element of Adam West's character, Adam, wanting to fit in more with the stunt crew. I mean, and not working out. I mean, I would have liked to have seen more of that, because for the brief amount of time we see Adam West, we actually see that he has a bit of range to him, because at first, I mean, he's basically playing, a jolly version of himself. But then when we see his, surprise and disappointment at being rejected, I mean, that feels very authentic. And I would have liked to have seen that a little more explored. And I feel like if Adam West had a little more to do in the film, I think this would have been one of those movies that showed that, yeah, Adam West could definitely do more than campy Batman, and also, while I didn't necessarily have a problem with the over-the-top gonzo freewheeling comedic portions of the film, which take up a good portion of the movie, I did feel like that they sort of overshadowed the more dramatic side of things, because when it comes to the drama of the movie, I mean, it feels very real and very authentic, especially if you have known people who have had extensive damage done to their bodies for one reason or another, and they're kind of in denial about it. Except in this case, I mean, we're talking about people in the stunt profession, and so it's like those parts of the movie I thought were very well done, but we don't get a whole lot of focus on them. It's like we get a good enough focus on them in the third act of the movie, to the point where it's like, okay, yes, this is harsh reality, calling here, but because of the first and second act of the movie, for the most part, focusing on comedy, I felt like the dramatic side of the movie was overshadowed by the comedy. And so, whereas if this had been something like a straight up comedy, I feel like things might have been a little more consistent. But because of the fact that we go from comedy to drama, and there may have been a hint of the whispering of drama here and there in the first or second act, but not enough to say make the transition an easy one. I feel like that was probably the one thing that kept the movie from being great, in my opinion, because I mean, this is a good movie. I mean, Hooper, make no mistake, is a good movie. And if you're a Burt Reynolds fan, this is definitely one you owe it to yourself to check out. It's just, I feel like the transition from comedy to drama wasn't the smoothest, and I just think that if I don't know, maybe if something had been different with the screenplay, if they'd had more elements of drama in the first and second act, then the transition from comedy to drama, wouldn't have been so jarring, because while I do appreciate the whole splash of cold water in the face feeling, the fact that there's a downside to being a stuntman. I mean, I did appreciate that aspect of the movie. It's just, it is a jarring transition though when you're seeing a good portion of the movie being shown as a comedy, and it is funny. It's just I guess one thing I could think of is like another movie that Sally Field was in, Mrs. Doubtfire. I mean, that was a comedy, but it was a good balance between comedy and drama, and the transition from one to the other, it didn't feel out of place or jarring because it was a good balance, right? Whereas here, I mean, while both elements work well, the balance, the comedy outweighs the drama. And so when you get to the drama, I mean, it's very well done, very believable, but because of, the large amount of comedy that came before, it is kind of jarring. So that to me is, like I said, the one thing that keeps the movie from being great. And so, but yeah, other than that though, I thought this was a good movie. It was fun, and as far as stuff from the 70s, I mean, this is definitely a good movie, and it made me appreciate the profession of being a stuntman that much more. And I still have a lot to learn about that profession, but at the same time, what you see on screen here is, by most accounts, very authentic, to the real life stunt profession. And in fact, one of the cool things about the movie is that some of the stunts that you see here were actually record breakers. For example, there's one particular scene where Hooper is doing this jump without a parachute from a helicopter, and and there's this big bag that he's supposed to fall on, right? So of course, this being a very dangerous stunt, especially with it being without a parachute, this was let's see, I believe it was it was 232 feet that this stuntman dropped from the helicopter and onto this bag, right? This huge airbag, and it was a record breaker at the time. And of course, they do their best to make it look like Burt Reynolds is actually doing it, but it is a stuntman doing that stunt. So you see some real stuff in the movie, which is pretty cool. And that rocket stunt, when it gets to that portion of the movie, when Hooper and Ski are in the car and going through this town that is being blown up, I mean, it's impressive at how chaotic it all is, because it really does look like a town being blown up. I mean, it's real buildings and everything. But when it gets to that part, when they make, where they're about to make the jump, and when you see it in the rocket car in action, it's pretty cool because it actually was a stunt. So, but I highly doubt that Burt Reynolds and Jan Michael Vincent were actually in the car when that happened, though. So, but for the purposes of the movie, it was a pretty cool stunt. So, but yeah, I'm going to give tongue tied. I'm going to give Hooper 4 out of 5 stars. It was a good movie. So as far as the Blu-ray goes, unfortunately, it's kind of a bare bones Blu-ray, and as far as like anything in the way of extra features, I mean, I don't believe it had any. I mean, there might have been a trailer or something, but then again, it's just, I feel like this is a Blu-ray that would have benefited from, some special features, I mean, at the very least, I mean, it does have subtitles, because, I mean, this being an older movie, the audio, with a lot of noise going on in the background and everything, considering that this is like, the setting is, the movie industry and there's a lot going on, it can be hard to hear some of the words at times, and so the subtitles, definitely help. So I'm glad that the Blu-ray has subtitles at least. But it would have been nice if there had been like a commentary track or retrospective documentary, considering the significance of the film to the stunt industry and the fact that it was a tribute to the people of the stunt industry, and also just the fact that it would have been a neat documentary to touch upon the meta aspects of the film involving certain people in front of the camera and behind the camera. So also I will mention though, the movie is rated PG, but there's quite a bit of language in there. I mean, like not like full on F-bombs, but definitely enough profanity to where you're like, you might not want to let a little kid watch the movie. And there's at least one scene where you have a surprising amount of female nudity, and it's a funny scene and everything. It's they play a prank on the director because it's his birthday, and they have a stripper pop out of a box and hug him to her bosom and everything. But you do see a good portion of her bosom, and to where it's like it may as well not be covered at all. So it's kind of like, yeah, you might want to not let your little kids, if you have little kids, you might not want to let them watch the movie just yet. But so just be aware of that, even though the movie is PG. So this is PG in 1978. But yeah, so Hooper was a good movie. So 4 out of 5 stars. But yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to watch my review and listen to it. And if you made it this far, thank you. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe, and drop a line if you got any questions or comments. So y'all take care. Have a good night. Bye.